Okay, hi Tomek. So
Hi,
this
Łukasz.
is our new initiative in which we will talk about things that are interesting to us on this channel to get a little bit more movement in here. Nothing has been happening since quite some time, and we'll discuss concepts that you may be familiar with, but we'll try to approach it from slightly different perspective. So today we'll talk
Yeah.
about event sourcing. Hey Tomek.
Hi, Łukasz. I would just like to add that we will try to do it in the slightly shorter form of videos to touch a lot of topics, let's say, but in the shorter form.
Yes, around 15 minutes is our goal. We'll see how it will go. Yeah, so not to prolong this introduction, today, as I mentioned, we'll talk about event sourcing. So, Tomek, what's event sourcing? How do you understand this term?
Well, it's quite easy concept, let's say. It's a pattern persistence mechanism for persisting state of the object in the form of events in an append-only log. And I would say that's it, nothing else. It has nothing to do actually with mostly has nothing to do with the architecture itself. And if you want to use the event sourcing, you only have to change the place where you exactly read and write data to the database.
Okay, but then to be a little bit more specific, what would be the difference between what you said and regular relational database that we mostly used in Rails projects?
Yeah, so now let's jump into the Miro board as we have some examples for that. You know that I'm quite a picky person, so I will just
Yeah.
put a star here. We are talking about RDBMS here because it's like most standard setup probably in your projects, but actually it can be also a document database. The thing here is just about storing the state of the object in the given database. And in the, let's say, standard setup, RDBMS in this case, let's say, when you have the delivery address and user, for example, set her address to A, at some point in time, you have a one row in the database, which is ID 1, for example here. And then user changes the address to B. You have just the state, the latest state. So you don't know actually what was your address the previous week, but you know that now it's B, right? But you don't know the history at all of the user's address. And
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
yeah. Do you want to
No,
add
just
anything here? No. Okay.
no. Just want to confirm.
Um,
I agree.
cool. Cool. We have an agreement with that. Yeah. So now, if we would, now we would like to actually compare it to the event sourcing approach when we have the event store where we keep the events. So when the user first time changes his address, we store the event about the setting the address, changing the address to street A. And then when user decides to change the address, we store another event about changing the address to B. And actually we know, in this case, we know what was the address week ago because we have two events in the database. And we also can have the current state by replying those events and applying it to the object. So we read the first event and we apply that it was address A, and then the address changed to B, we apply it to the object. So we know that currently the user has the B address, but we also know what was the address week before. So basically I would compare those two approaches in this beautiful drawing done by Łukasz.
Yeah. So Yeah, that's correct. And the main difference is that we exactly know what the address was before, right? And in such example, it would be useful in one specific case that I had in mind when I was drawing this. So if you assume that the customer made some order, but they changed the address, right? So in that case, if let's say that if the address change happened here, sorry, we know when it happened, but when the ordering happened here, so if we say that order was placed, we would know that we have to send it to this address. I mean, depending on your model in the RDBMS, you would also know that, depending how you manage that. But however, if the order was placed but it wasn't shipped until this point, it may be, not always, not necessarily, but it may be tricky to figure out why the order was shipped to incorrect place, which could happen in that scenario. In this one, we could check that more easily, right? And here, there's this discussion could occur that the customer would complain that they didn't get the order into a place where they expected it. So someone could ask, hey, what was the street address last week? And we don't know. We now only know it's a B. In the other case, we would exactly know. Perhaps we could admit that we made a mistake or that the customer did something that they shouldn't do. If our system supports that, of course. But hey, such things happen in the world, right?
Exactly. I think we did a quite nice introduction to what the event sourcing is and what is the difference between the standard approach and let's say standard snapshot approach, because you have just the snapshot version, the last version of the object, compared to event sourced example. So Łukasz, when such approach would be useful? I mean, the event sourced approach.
I mean, there's lots of cases, but
marketing talk now. Yeah.
Marketing talk. No, but honestly, like we work on the projects together, right? And many times we had a situation where we didn't know exactly what happened. We only knew that what's the current state, but we have events like flowing around the system. There's quite a lot of them, and we have this nice feature to explore events, which is the browser in Rails Event Store. So we can find out how we got into certain state of event sourced, let's say, entity. Well, maybe the entity is not the word, of event source concept in our business code. So if business wants to know why something happened, then we can figure it out based on the data and not just on the assumptions. And of course, we could do it by using some logs, right? We could explore logs, try to find this information, but everyone who did that knows how painful it is. Also, there is this log retention problem. If we don't have long retention, then we may just lose this data. So that's one case. The other case is when we have some audits, right? Event sourcing is perfect for audits because, as Tomek said, it's an append-only log. Append-only log means that you cannot remove anything from it, right? Or at least you shouldn't. I mean, technically, it's possible to do it. It's just a database. But you shouldn't remove events. And then once there's a company that wants to do audit of your company, it's important that this data is just trustworthy, right? You have also other things in mind when you say audit. For example, if you just want to know the history of changes, right? Just for the user, that's also useful, and you get it out of the box because you don't have to do it, let's say, in a way that is less prepared for that, such as temporal tables.
Oh yeah, so you actually mentioned them, so I think you can elaborate a bit more about them, because I also seen them a lot in some legacy projects as as they are sometimes business comes to us and say that we should store some data, right, about what happened. So could you elaborate a bit more about temporal tables as well?
Yeah, sure. So I think you phrase it also very nicely that business comes to us and they ask for historical data, but if we are in this RDBMS setup, let's say, it's a little bit too late, right? I mean, yes, we can start gathering the data, but we will not have the past data at this point, right? So we can only get the new data for, so for the new records. But if I just move this a little bit for one moment, oops. Sorry, I wrote this line. It's interrupting my selection. I'll just show you how it would look like together with the additional table. So if we had the temporal table, we could have the state A at this point. Nothing would change. It would have some primary key, but also probably some foreign key, right? And it would point to this street ID, something like that. And then if we would change the address, we would have another one. So the state would be we would have A, but also there would be state B in this temporal database, right? So and you can set it in a way that it happens automatically. So whenever you, for example, insert the data into the sorry about that. Whenever you insert the data into your table, the temporal table will create additional record pointing out to this street. So in this case, I could say that this guy would say they know, right? Yeah. So there's one problem with that approach. There's one problem with that approach that now we have two sources of truth, right? Because if at some point those two tables, so say this table and the other one, if they diverge, then we don't know which one is the truth. Sorry, I just have to let my cat out. She's complaining. Right, so that would diverge. And I had similar experience in one of the previous projects that we actually did these temporal tables because we weren't so much into events. And it was really hard to figure out where is the truth.
I think they are good starting points sometimes to just start publishing events in the system. So then you actually treat this part and this part on the left hand side as the source of truth, but then on the right hand side you have this temporal table where you just store data when something happened. But yeah, I totally agree that then you have you can have a mismatch, right, between the source of truth and actually the temporal table that was done sometimes for some auditing purposes, usually I think, or some reporting purposes, right?
Yeah, exactly. But with event store, you don't have that, right? You gather the events, you just have them in one place. You know that this is your truth. Of course, we'll not go into that today, but you have to somehow replicate the data to read it to have it in more accessible way when it comes to displaying the information on the UI, right?
Okay, and because you said already about exploring logs, audits, having this temporal table approach, but are there any other benefits of using event store? I mean, for sure there are more of them, but could you add anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. What is cool when you start having those events flowing in your application, you don't have to do that. It's not an implication, but event sourcing would allow you to do event-driven architecture. So those events could be consumed by some kind of event handlers or processors or whatever pattern you want to have. In both ways, right? It could be done synchronously. So, but there's some cons to that. I don't really like that approach, but I will elaborate in other time. But also, you can get asynchronous event handlers, right? And it enables you to build more complex workflows that the user doesn't have to wait for when they change something, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very important. Besides that, of course, you have the context of when the certain change happened, right? You know, in the snapshot approach, you know when some change happened, you can have, especially in Rails, you have the created add column, you have the updated add column. That's really cool. But when it comes to event sourcing, you can see more. You see the context of when certain change happened in terms of what was happening in the system previously, right? Say you impersonate a user and you do some operation and then you stop impersonating, right? You're able to find out this little time window when the administrator or just the impersonator, let's say, when they performed some kind of action, right? And you're
And you
able
actually
to specifically say, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And you actually have the exact information that this happened, right?
Yeah,
Out of the box.
exactly.
If you
Yeah,
start recording those events, right, that the user was impersonated by someone, for example, right? Yeah, that's
exactly.
huge.
Would you add something, Tomek?
Well, you mentioned about event driven. We will not cover that in this episode, but it's probably the topic for one of the following ones. But I think it's also important to mention now when we talk about storing the events that, in my opinion, business usually thinks in events way, let's say, and that's why you often can hear like sentences like, "If this happened, do this," right? Even though we teach sometimes business to use, let's say, crude terminology, create, update, and so on, they still
always hurts my heart.
Yeah, exactly. But and they still trying to do the workarounds for that, for using those words. And when I create, let's do this. So you see that they by default, they think in the event way, let's say.
Yeah, if we unteach them to do what we teach them to do through those all years of unsuccessful delivery of software, then and also talking the technical jargon with them, right? Because it's also our fault. It's not only on the business. Now we need to kind of revert this situation. At least that's what we always try to do, but that's a topic for another episode. But you're totally right. I find it often that if we visualize something to the business we work with events, even using this orange stickies, it just becomes so clear for them what we want to visualize, what we want to talk about, and what happens in the system. It's just way easier to visualize it. So yeah, totally agree with that. But I think that we should be slowly finishing this episode, right? I'm not sure how we stay.
We are running. Yeah, we are actually on time. We are running.
Nice.
Out of time. But I think we covered a lot of things here. So yeah, we can come back with another episode soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
We should. We really want to keep it short because we know that everyone is short on time, right? And if we can, we would like to make it something that you can consume during your morning coffee. That would be really cool. So maybe in a few steps, can we summarize what we talked about?
Yeah, sure. Sure. So first of all, if we go with the standard way, let's say this part, we only have the information about the most recent change, right? So we know the street B, for example, in this case.
In the approach,
exactly, we keep snapshots. In the event sourcing approach, we have all history data as well and the context of what happened with the address in this case, in this example, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, the other thing is that we keep it as an append only, write only log. We don't modify the state. We just add another event. So even if something was broken before, we add another event that should compensate this the issue.
Yeah.
Of course, there are some approaches, right, about changing streams, events, but
Yeah.
we do not.
Let's not get into that. Let's not get into that right now because it will be another 15 minutes of at least 15 minutes of conversation. Let's keep it for another time. But yeah, totally. There are
Exactly.
different strategies how we can handle that.
Yeah, and such approach also gives us, let's say, auditing out of the box, right? The event store, event sourcing approach.
Yeah, your data is more trustable whenever you have an audit. I hope you don't, but if you do.
Yeah, and one last thing that I think I could also add, I would actually repeat what I said at the very beginning of the episode. So you don't have to change your architecture to apply event sourcing in some small limited, let's say, place, right? You can start to play with it without changing anything in the architecture. It's just a way of storing the data and fetching the data, state of the object.
Yeah, totally agree. And my famous last word would be start gathering data before your business asks you for this, because later on it's going to be too late. If you're interested in that approach, you can visit railseventstor.org to see the event store, the best event store implementation, in my opinion, in Rails. And you can take a look for some examples at our blog.
Yeah, I'm looking for a approved icon now at the end of the episode. Ta-da!
Cool. All right. See you next time.
Yeah. If you have any questions, comments, just leave them at the bottom. We have some ideas for the next episodes, but we are always open to hear what you want to hear from us. Yeah. And that's it.
Right.